Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Brother Saku. It's great to be here. And if you don't understand everything I say, it's not because of you. It's because of my huge jet lag. That is kind of my souvenir from down under. Anybody from Australia here? Ooh, New Zealand? Wonderful. You know, one of the questions people often ask me when I move from a place like Helsinki, Finland, to live in Sydney, Australia, is that where are you going to find a good school for your children? We have two little sons, little boys coming with me, and I said, what are you talking about? Of course, a good school is the next school around the corner, and it doesn't look like this in Australia or in New Zealand. You have to be more careful. And I said, you know, what I'm going to do in Sydney is to send my kids to the nearest public school, and then do what any academic or researcher would do, is to do a social experiment on my own kids. I interview them and write a paper about the public school system in Australia. It's good to be here. I try to follow what Saku was saying earlier. I think what HundrED really celebrates are two things. One is they try to identify and make known the innovations, all these good things that are happening around the world, many of them in your schools or schools you work with. But the other thing I think that is very important, that I would like to be a focus of this summit here, is to also pay a little bit time and attention to the question that how does this change happen? And just like Saku was saying, that it's a completely different thing to change one school compared to change the whole system. And my interest as a researcher and scholar and author for a long time has been more on the latter side, to try to figure out how the change happens. And I'm spending my 15-20 minutes here to talk a little bit about that. If you want to take a visit of my slides, just join me in social media, and it will take you to the slide deck that you're going to see around here. Are we good? Yeah. You like my English? Yeah. Because I can speak Finnish too, if you want. Some people say it doesn't really make any difference this morning after the long dinner and drinks last night. But that's what I'm going to do with you. You know, now we are in a situation where everybody's talking about the change. But, you know, what often happens when you have a conversation, people say that, you know, I love change, but you go first. Nobody wants to change, and we all want everybody else to change, but not ourselves. And we often know, particularly from education, is that the more things change, the more they remain the same. And this is something that we have learned during the last 100 years of efforts to try to change things, that you can work hard with the system, and the harder you work, the harder the system pushes back, right? And it seems like, you know, nothing is changing. Okay, and then there are those who say that, but you know, the world is changing. Everything around us is going upside down, and that's why the schools have to change. What we do with the kids have to be different what it was before. And there are many drivers for that. Now, you know, today we had an election day in the United States that used to be my home for several years, and there many people say that we have to change what we do in schools because the facts are not anymore what they used to be. I lived 5 years in Washington, D.C., but I'm fine now. And there people used to say that there are two things. There are facts, and then there are true facts. And we have to teach children the difference between these two. Of course, the other one is the technology, you know, what the technology can do. Many people say that we have to redesign and reform and transform our schools because of the technology is changing everything. And that's true. You know, artificial intelligence, machine learning, algorithms, they can do wonderful things. I'm going to show you one thing that is happening. You see 3 images here, and 2 of them are actually original works of the author, the painter, and one of them is painted by the machine. I'm going to ask you which one of them you think is not painted by the machine, by the human being. Okay? Take a second and turn to your neighbor and say, what is your guess of all of these paintings, which one is not painted by Van Gogh, and why? It's quite hard, isn't it? And I'm asking this question also because it's going to be very difficult to distinguish real things from artificial things in the future when it comes to classrooms, right? How do we know what is real? Okay, so if you think that this is the painting A is done by machine? Raise your hand. Okay, look around. Okay, if you think there is a B that is done by artificial intelligence machine, raise your hand. Okay, C. How about C? There's some people who raise your hands all the time. Okay, it's C, and it's not only that it's a copy of the Van Gogh paintings, but it's created from a photograph of a real thing by the machine that has learned to paint like Van Gogh. Okay. So my point here is, of course, that we can have a teacher or somebody who is doing almost the real things in the classroom in the future. That's why we have to change. I don't know. Okay, so let me speak a little bit about the time that we have spent during the last 50 years, really, when it comes to school change, when it comes to the question that how do things change, this original title of this morning. And my key point here is that we know enough about how things happen. The problem is, or challenge is, that we often tend to kind of forget or ignore the past, particularly we here, when we work in innovation, we're looking to the future. We're trying to solve the problem of tomorrow, while we should also pay attention to what we have learned, what the people who were working before us have learned. I remember when I was much younger and started as a school teacher and then went to research, I thought that we invent everything, that I know everything there is to know about these things. I very much ignored the past, authors and scholars and people who worked on the same things before me. Now I understand when I'm much older that I was wrong. That many of those things that I thought we invented, or I kind of discovered, were known far before. I just didn't have a kind of a patience to sit down and take books and read what's going on there. I'm going to show you one kind of idea. This is not the only idea of each of the decades starting from 1960s all the way today, that I think the HundrED community should stop a little while and go back and see, what these people have been doing. Because I argue that this would help us with this question, how to put change in a scale successfully around the world. So 1960s, and while you see these figures here, I want you to reflect also, what do I know about it? Do I know the works or ideas of these people or scholars? Or are they completely new to me? The first one is this one. And this person is James Coleman. He's not really an education innovator, but he created something that is a kind of a root of huge movement afterwards. We still work on these ideas. And he was leading a commission that came up with a report called Equality of Educational Opportunity in 1966. Raise your hand if you know this work. Okay, two people. I invite all of you to go back and see this. We just celebrated 2 years ago the 50th anniversary of this significant, probably the most significant single research ever done in the field of education and educational change. And it's significant because Coleman and his research group in the United States concluded, after many years of research on schools and classrooms and children, that schools don't matter, period. So the outcome of this study was that it doesn't matter what you do in a school, there are some kids that will never learn. They will never learn because they come from the conditions and environments where they are not supported or helped to be successful. And that, of course, alone was a trigger around the world, but particularly in the United States, to raise questions that, really? Is the picture so pessimistic, really, that we cannot, that it doesn't matter what the teachers and schools do, there are a number of kids, and often large number of kids, who will never learn in the school. And the significance of this Coleman report and study is that it kind of triggered a counter movement. So people started to ask questions like, hey, wait a minute, if we have a particular type of school and we do certain things, for sure we can make a difference. And that led to the 1970s, and the early part of 1970s was a heavy work around the world, but especially in the United States, to try to challenge this Coleman's conclusion. Okay? And one of the most significant and important persons there was this one. Anybody recognize the person over there? The photograph is not really good. His name is Ron Edmonds. Raise your hand if you know Ron Edmonds' work. Nobody knows, okay? One person. Go back and read. He didn't write too much. He's a Harvard University alumnus. He's one of the first African-American education scholars, and he worked at the level of the system. But he came up with a very strong statement saying that, yes, we can make a difference in children's lives if we want to. But it doesn't happen with the same ways and same means as before. And Ron Edmonds, he's gone, he's not with us anymore here, but he remains in a history as somebody who really showed people that we can make a difference. He's one of the fathers of the effective school movement. Effective schools, we're trying to identify those characteristics of schools that are able to make a difference in children's lives. Things like strong management, leadership, focus on learning rather than teaching, and many other things. We know all of that, but we don't know the work of Ron Edmonds afterwards. So he created this research and practice movement that was able to reveal many of these things that we know now in the 1970s. That's why he's my hero in the 1970s. Then we come to the 1980s, and now we have probably more candidates there who to pick up, who would be the one who had really left a mark in trying to tackle this problem of how things change in a school. And again, my hero is this one. His name is Perus Choice. Again, raise your hand if you have heard about Perus Choice. Nobody. Go and read him. He's still alive. He still works in California, United States. And this is one of his massively important books for all of you, where he basically shows how most of the staff development, professional learning efforts that we have had before, and we still continue to have no impact, because they are done in a kind of an inappropriate way. So the kind of innovation that Perus Choice brought with us is that you can give teachers lectures, you can give them workshops, you can show them how to do these things, and you can make them have a conversation to one another. Those things are not enough. What is needed is a kind of on-the-job learning, almost like an apprenticeship type of practice that teachers, when they're learning new things, new teaching methods, need before they really understand what's going on there. Isn't it easy? We all know this, but very few people are actually doing that. The problem here, of course, that if you follow Perus Choice's ideas, it means that change at the level of the pedagogy and the classroom becomes very slow, because you need to work with the same group of teachers and educators for the longer period of time. I did my own doctoral work based on Perus Choice's work here in Finland 30 years ago. And I was only able to kind of replicate and repeat what he already knew. That change is very slow. Often people need a long time to practice in their own classroom, in their own school, before they're able to change. So if we rush the reform, we're going to ruin it. That's the conclusion from there. Then we come to the 1990s. Okay? So my 1990s hero is definitely this person over there, Seymour Serrano. Again, raise your hand if you have read anything from Seymour. Go back and do your homework, people. He wrote about 45 books about this very topic that we are talking about here. And nobody knows about him. Okay? So don't try to put any innovation in scale before you read at least one work from Seymour. He is not with us anymore. This is one of his best books. Just look at the title. It's just like on the topic of today and what we try to do. Very few people actually are aware of what he has been doing. Okay, so Seymour's kind of I'll get back to this in a moment, but his kind of a central idea was that every school has a culture. And if you want to change the school, you have to change the culture of the school, not just the people within it, or facilities, or curriculum, or other things. And changing a culture is always a kind of a complicated thing. And then we come to the 2000s. This is interesting. I tried to kind of find who is my hero in the first decade of this new millennium. I couldn't find anything. And do you know why? Because the 2000s has been dominated by the OECD and PISA and many other studies like this. You know, most people, when they talk about things we are talking about here, refer to the PISA, the large-scale student assessments. Okay? And we look at the correlations and we compare countries, often comparing correlations to correlations, and much less about research. These figures that I mentioned earlier are a long time gone when the OECD PISA came. So that's a kind of I wouldn't call it the dark age of educational change, but it's a kind of a time when we really stopped doing and looking at research, and most people were paying attention to statistical conclusions. And then we come to this decade. Again, who would be the heroes? Who would be your hero during this decade that we are living in? You. No, it's not me. That's the wrong answer. You know, maybe he's here with us. Maybe he's Saku. maybe it's HundrED. What HundrED is doing by trying to help us to understand the complexities of these things. I leave this to you to think about who would be your hero other than Saku and myself here this decade. But we need to, I invite you to move beyond, people like me and those who really do the donkey work in trying to research and understand how the change happens. There's much to learn from those. So let me show you a couple of things very quickly. If you don't know Seymour Serrano's work, and I pick up him because for me he's personally the most significant scholar in this field ever. I knew him personally. He was a great, really interesting person, Yale professor forever. And I'm just going to show you 5 things as a kind of a snippets to raise your appetite to go back to your library and read any of his 45 books, really. The first one, I mentioned this already, is that he was a strong advocate since the late 1960s that we have to see schools as a kind of entities that have culture. And every culture is about values, it's about beliefs, it's about relationships between people. And if we want to change the school, we have to try to approach the school so that we are able to change the culture. And that's where often many innovations and many change efforts stop, because they don't see schools as places that have kind of a specific culture. So we have to look at the schools in a different way. Then the other one that he was always talking, all of his books are asking the same question: what is the ultimate purpose of schooling? And he answers himself often saying that there's no one purpose. The schooling has many purposes. And then he gets back to you as a reader and says that, but if I put the gun on your head, and I'm about to pull the trigger, unless you're able to give me the most important reason for schooling, you're going to tell something, right? And his answer is that the most important purpose of schooling for him, if he thinks about his own children, and remember here, if you think about some other people's children, his answer is different. Yeah? Think about your own kids. What do you want to have them to get out of the school? And he says that the most important purpose of schooling, a single purpose, is that children learn more about themselves, and they want to learn more about the school and people around them when they leave the school, period. It's not about literacy and numeracy and those other things. This is the ultimate purpose of schooling. And he said that often when we don't know what the purpose of schooling is, our innovation do not go further. Okay? The third one is that the systems are very hard to change. That often when you try to change the system, it will push back. The harder you push the change, the innovation, the harder the system gets back to you. And this is something that we need to understand. It doesn't make any sense to try to, force or mandate innovation. This is what Serrano says. We have to find another way. And the other way is what you heard in the 2 previous points. Then he's also saying that we cannot have a productive conditions for productive learning. He's speaking about productive learning unless we have those same conditions for teachers in every school. Just think about it. So we cannot create conditions for productive learning for children unless those same conditions exist for teachers in a school. Look at the schools around. How many of them actually do this? Very few. Some of them who are here now are probably exceptions, but most of the schools don't think like this. And then finally, the democratic principle, in other words, involving people in decision-making and deciding what to do, is often undermined, or even worse, it's ignored. This is, as Seymour Serrano's one of these points, that schools have to be, just like John Dewey was saying, democratic places for everybody. There are many others. If you go and read your Seymour Serrano's work, you will learn this and many other things that are helpful, I argue, for this. So my conclusion here is that if we have too many innovation without thinking about these things, it may be actually blocking the learning that we are trying to get moving with these innovations in our schools. So we have to be mindful with this one. And often, you know, when it comes to technology, for example, we don't think like this. We just believe that, you know, more technology is a good thing. Take a look at this 30-second clip about the goods and bads of what technology can do.
Emma.
See this?
Emma.
And that one.
Emma.
Oh my God.
Emma. Emma.
So let's be mindful with these things. Now, you know, let me take you just for a second back to Ron Edmonds' work. Just if you read these lines, you know, he was saying this in 1979, that we know more than we need to provide, help every child everywhere in any school to learn well. Whether we do this or whether we do that, whether we don't do that depends on the question why we haven't done so far that. So this is what I want to leave with you, and just have these three quick kind of a summary conclusions that would help us to put change in scale. One is that let's pay respect to the past that we have done. The more you innovate, the more you have to turn back and see what has happened before. We have to be able to identify those scholars and the words and works of wisdom that people have done before us and left for us to read and consider. You have seen some of them there. There are plenty of those things. The problem now is that there's so much crap when it comes to the literature of school educational change or school improvement. It's sometimes difficult to distinguish what is good and what is not. Then the other one is that we need to make room for new ideas. You cannot change the school without, you know, if you propose something that the schools or the system should do without taking something away. And that's one of the most common problems around the world, is that there are a lot of proposals what the schools or systems should do, but very few people actually say that while you do this, you can throw something away. And that's how it works. It's as simple like this. You cannot put any innovation in scale unless your innovation of change includes the idea of taking something away. And this is something that will empower principals and others to do these things. And this is exactly my last point here, is to make sure that we do this with children. I know that many of the innovations, the 100 innovations this year and last year as well, include this idea, that we do the change with children, with young people. We listen to them, we give them voice. This is absolutely critical. It goes at the heart of the Saracens' democratic education principle. Again, if we ignore this, if we think that we adults or the system knows what works for kids or young people, it's wrong. It's not going to work. It probably will work somewhere, but it's not going to work at the level of the system. So these are the thoughts I want to leave with you. And one of my favorite things around, you know, all of these things is to bring play back to schools and the communities. And if you want to read more about that, that's my new book with William Doyle coming out next spring, Let the Children Play, where we conclude many of these similar things. Thank you, people. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful summit. Thank you.
Thank you, Pasi. I have to start reading Seymour more. One question. I think, which one of you in here strongly disagrees with Pasi's message? Okay.
In principle, I have to disagree with myself.
But the main question in here is that if you really want to make the change happen at scale, it's also about the public opinion. It's about the media, it's about the parents, it's about the debate we are having. How do you change that one in a scale?
Well, you know, I think one thing that we educators, raise your hand if you're a practitioner, if you're a teacher or principal or something that you work, okay. This includes you and probably some other people as well. I think one thing, and me certainly, you know, one thing that we have not done well is exactly this advocacy of our profession. You know, how many of you write regularly op-eds to the media? Very few. How many of you go to the town halls and, you know, make a speech about what we should do? Very few of us. So we have this voice as educators, and we have this power to influence and change things, but we don't use it. And that's why I think all the new teacher education programs, I have some of my student fellows from Harvard. You know what I did in my 3-year stint at Harvard University with every single new educator? I insisted that I don't care, you know, the other things you learn, but you have to learn one thing, and it's the advocacy. You need to learn how to write a kind of a powerful, impactful op-ed or blog or make a speech about things that are important, and that's where we have the handicap. And you know, if the 100 movement can help people to understand this, that we have to use our voice as educators, we have to speak out and write, particularly the times like this, we can change probably that thing that you were pointing to, Saku.
Thanks so much, and I'll finish this one with the news. I didn't ask permission, but let's see what happens afterwards. But I'm extremely proud to say is that we are setting up an advisory board at HundrED, and Pasi has promised to be the chair of the board. So that's really kind of you. Thanks.